What does it take to be king? That's a question that if you were to ask every single person that you know, you may get a lot of different answers. Some may give similar answers, but the point that is attempting to be made is that the path to the top does not come with directions. When it comes to building an empire, it all circles around the relationships one creates. Relationships made whether through fear or through trust, one must shoulder the weight of every man who gives their life for them. How that is done exactly lies in the answer to the original question. Sano Manjiro and Izana Kurokawa are the two people who, despite their individual faults, wear their crowns high enough to never show the cracks on them. Men who understand the darkness inside their hearts and through understanding are able to take on and manage others' darknesses that are around them. The both of them accomplished this feat in entirely different ways, and throughout the Kanto incident, we see not just between the two leaders of Tokyo Manji Gang and Tenjiku, but amongst the members of each individual gang, just how the results of each leader's resolve holds their organizations together. Izana, who creates an environment of thriving crime and confidence through power and fear. And Mikey, who welcomes each member of Toman as a family and instills in each of its members a sense of belonging and need to protect. What sets these two delinquents apart from every other delinquent in Tokyo is not just the overwhelming power that each of them wields, but the lengths each of them are willing to go to achieve their goals. While Izana fully embraces the dark impulsivity and uses this to conquer other gangs and assimilate them into his own, Mikey does his best to hide those urges deep inside. Mikey holds close to the light by those around him, his friends who ground him and remind him why kindness and patience are virtues that a leader must hold close. As both leaders are able to discover their own answer to the king's equation, the most interesting thing is just how different the results are from those answers. Tenjiku is able to swallow most of Tokyo's largest delinquents and bend the knee of some of the greatest leaders and gangsters to create its Big Four. Izana fuels the gang's terrifying aura mostly on his own. It is able to spread its darkness through established pillars that already give off their own darkness and simply amplify Izana's. Meanwhile, Toman, even in the fallen state that it's in after the death of Emma, shows just how strong real passion and loyalty can be, with each member able to light an inferno of strength of their own through pure dedication and love to their leader and their organization. It takes small fry like Angry or Peiyan, builds them up and creates beacon of lights as opposed to small flickers on their own. Mikey runs Toman not with an iron fist but with a warm embrace and a hand to push you back up when you fall. From the outside looking in, one would assume Izana's answer is obviously working better than Mikey's. But, based on the outcome of the war between both Tenjiku and Toman, that gets called into question immediately. To truly understand these themes and who succeeds as a better leader, we must first disregard the actual Toman victory and examine this a little more thoroughly to understand what actually works better. Giving in to your darkness and paving a path of destruction by lashing those black feelings out, leaving others behind to follow? Or fostering a system of understanding, bettering not just ourselves, but those around us, taking in the darkness of those around us, not just following, but walking side by side. Izana created Tenjiku in order to conquer Japan and spread his darkness throughout society in order to cure his own black heart. The name Tenjiku is an obsolete term for India and comes from the journey to the west, an allegory for how Izana views his journey to achieving this dominance over the Tokyo crime world. Izana arrived to his answer of the king's equation through the many years he spent dwelling in his own darkness. Being sent to an institution as a young child and being completely separated from his family, he is left with only bitter thoughts and jealousy of the family that abandoned him. His only saving grace was Shinichiro Manjiro, and much like Mikey, a lot of Izana's kindness and aspirations come from Shinichiro. Izana inherited much of Shinichiro's delinquency and enjoyed riding motorcycles with his older brother. Another similarity between both Mikey and Izana is just how easily influenced they are by those around them, as both Mikey and Izana were deeply touched by Shinichiro and received most of their dreams and aspirations to create the new era of delinquency from him. This further represents how easily swayed and manipulated the both of them are by those capable to guide their hand. For example, both Mikey and Izana are easily influenced to become malicious crime lords by someone like Kisaki. The main difference being while Mikey needed to be subtly pushed in the correct direction, Izana needed little encouragement from Kasaki to begin acting devilishly, even openly admitting he will allow himself to be a pawn in Kasaki's plan just because it brings him joy and allows him to spread his darkness further throughout Tokyo. Despite Shinichiro's great influence on Izana, the child's mentality was completely shattered when he discovered he was a bastard child and not actually related to the Manjiro family. This makes Izana feel like his entire relationship with Shinichiro was built on a lie, and that his happiness was only an illusion. Even though something as trivial as blood relation does not concern Shinichiro, who is still willing to accept Izana as family, this isn't good enough for Izana, who selfishly wanted Shinichiro all to himself. You see, not only did the camel's back break when Izana discovered he was a mistress's child, Izana began to build an unhealthy resentment of Sano Manjiro, Shinichiro's younger brother. Only further pressed deeper into his heart by the fact Izana now shared no blood relation to Shinichiro, bringing Mikey even further ahead of himself in Izana's mind. Growing up in a reform school and having no real connection with any human beings besides Shinichiro, Izana began lashing out at the world around him, feeling if he has no connection to those around him, why should he spend any time taking them into consideration if they don't reciprocate? He did meet Kakucho Hito in his youth and created a strong relationship with him though. They both agreed that Kakucho would dedicate his life to Izana, and together they would conquer Tokyo, coining the name Tenjiku, which would be the title of their gang in the future. There was a solidifying moment in Izana's life that opened his heart to cruelty and taught him just how fear could be used to accomplish his goals. At the mere age of 12, Izana severely beat and terrorized a group of boys that had jumped him previously, all of them placed in medical conditions that were permanently damaging. Izana then, when trapping the leader of the group in a corner, threatens to permanently disable every person that the leader of the group holds dear for the rest of his life. And with what seemed to be endless torture and no way out of the situation, the leader had no choice, or at least he felt that way, to hang himself, seeing death as the only way to escape Izana's wrath. After only growing worse, if you can believe it or not, showing no sense of remorse or empathy, Izana commits larger and larger crimes until he is eventually placed in juvenile detention, which realistically, in the grand scheme of things, only served to drag Izana deeper into the abyss. While in juvie, Izana hones his sense of violence and begins creating his authority in the world of delinquents by literally beating the shit out of everyone that stood in his way until they either stayed down or followed behind him. It's here Izana meets the S62 generation, which is built by some of the strongest and durable gangsters ever seen in the delinquent world. Izana is able to make them all bend to his will and offer their lives in service to him. It is still just at the young age of 13 that Izana truly begins to understand his knack for smothering people's negativity with his own. No matter how dangerous or evil the people around him end up being, they are immediately snuffed out by his overwhelming malice. Either through violence or through fear, Izana's greatest strength is bending the darkness around him under his own, forcing them to follow him without question, only adding to the evil aura that Izana naturally exudes by providing a posse of harsh delinquents that only add to the initial fear. Izana begins to transform at this point, fully embracing his malice and enjoying the power that creating a personality of fear and authority gives him. Throughout his early years of delinquency, he is able to place himself as the 8th leader of the Black Dragons and begins focusing all of his anger around Mikey, planning to strip him of the happiness that Izana had ripped from him years prior. In his short time as leader of the Black Dragons, he is noted as being one of the most ruthless and strong leaders the gang has ever had. It's unknown how long he served before passing the title over to Shion Madarame. To complete the descent into darkness for Izana, what fully extinguished the lights from his eyes was the death of Shinichiro. Despite already feeling his older brother was stolen from him, his death stripped Izana of any emotion he may have struggled to still feel at that point. Izana went into a deep depression, feeling lost in his own darkness, wandering around with no real intention before Kasaki found him and was able to mold the young man back into the strong force of nature he was meant to be. Accepting his spot under Kasaki's thumb, Izana creates Tenjiku, the gang he and Kakucho had formed when they were younger, and is now reinvigorated with new purpose. With a direction to focus his darkness into, Izana sets his sights on Mikey and Tokyo itself. Understanding that his life has been nothing but pain, instead of attempting to heal this pain, Izana uses it as an engine to fuel his tyranny. Izana intends to crush everyone around him and put them under his boot, taking Mikey for everything that he holds dear in order to make him empty, just like Izana originally was, in order to then rebuild Mikey into a new, surrogate older brother that can replace Shinichiro. Izana's unstableness is reflected in this goal, as he constantly teeters between wanting to murder Mikey and wanting to make him that puppet, only truly held in focus by Kisaki when it comes time to direct Tenjiku. Sano Manjiro represents the pinnacle of what a leader should be. Mikey truly creates the entire foundation of Toman and allows all of its members ground to stand on. He provides them a strong example to follow while at the same time a tight grip on the ankles that keeps all of Toman's members grounded and real. Tokyo Manjiro Gang is literally named after Mikey, and despite the founding members' gripes with the name, they are willing to accept it and wear it proudly. This just shows their devotion and adoration of Mikey, and just how even from the beginning he was able to touch the people around him and free them from their daily struggles. During critical moments in the gang's lifetime, Mikey is able to show massive strength and resolve, not just through his fists, which don't get me wrong, he definitely puts that on full display, but he shows these qualities with his ability to forgive those around him that need it, no matter how hard that apology may be for Mikey himself. While the battle of 8-3 rages on and most of the cause falls on a deceived Pei-Yan, any average gang member would have tossed Pei-Yan to the side or even worse, treated him like an absolute enemy. Let alone when someone as important as Draken almost loses their life over this mistake. Mikey is able to forgive Pei-Yan and allow him to take his anger out over Pa's arrest on him specifically. In this situation, Pei-Yan was lost in confusion, not sure where to turn, and he was manipulated by a higher, more sinister power. At the end of the day, Pei-Yan is not to blame and was simply taken advantage of. Mikey was smart enough and had enough trust in his underling that even though he did a traitorous action, Pei-Yan was just hurting. And hurt is something that Mikey understands and can connect with. This is just one instance of Mikey taking on his partner's darkness and accepting it as a burden for them to hold together, rather than abusing that darkness for future use. Mikey even shows enough resolve to forgive someone like Kazutora, the man responsible for the death of Shinichiro, Mikey's older brother, and Baji Keisuke, one of Mikey's best friends. Even relaying the message through Draken to Kazutora not to kill himself, because there's still a place in Toman for him when he gets out of jail. It's possible what makes Mikey so able to accept the darkness of others is the terrifying pit of darkness that Mikey hides deep within himself. In almost every timeline that we've seen, one constant is the Mikey that we always see in the future. A cold, heartless criminal who is even willing to brutally murder and kill all of those he once held close. Even shooting Takemichi 3 times in the back in the final future timeline. Something he even had a hard time doing in the timeline that he literally was a serial killer. I mentioned in the beginning of the video just how important the people around Mikey are to keeping him grounded and keeping his head out of the clouds. People like Draken, Baji, people like Emma, even someone like Takemichi to a certain extent. These people were a constant reminder to Mikey that he was a normal person that had the potential to live a normal life. That his life was full of happiness and perhaps worth not throwing away in pursuit of crime or greed. As pretentious as this comparison may be, I truly feel someone that relates completely to this feeling of lonesome is the character of Satoru Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen. The invincible Mikey, someone that was destined for greatness from the day he was born. Without even putting in any effort, Mikey is able to build groups of people that want to follow him. He's able to form Toman out of love, respect, and idolization. And even after in the future when he changes and embraces his darkness, he's able to form organizations like Bon 10, whose members follow him more through a relationship of fear and gang politics. It's not hard to see why Mikey truly finds it hard to relate to those around him. While although he can become the force that shares their pain and grief, the depth of his own darkness is unable to be understood by many. After the death of Shinichiro, unlike Izana, it seems Mikey is able to recover at a great pace. Although it's obvious the loss affected him greatly, by the time Mikey is introduced into the story, he is happily trudging along his own path, ready to proudly live up to his brother's shadow and create a new era of delinquents. It is only as the other people that keep Mikey's heart down to earth start to disappear, that all the previous instances of loss Mikey is able to bear begin to overflow and take him over. At first, Takemichi assumes that Mikey falls to darkness because he loses Draken. He assumes it's because Mikey kills Kazutora. He assumes it's because Kisaki begins to take advantage of Mikey. Takemichi assumes all these things like they're singular events in Mikey's life that force him to make the split decision into a dark future. But the one mistake that Takemichi ends up continuing to make is the exact same mistake he makes when he gets shot in the back of Mikey in the final timeline. There's not just one solid event that destroys Mikey's character. It isn't Kisaki that snuffs out the flame from his eyes or the thrill of first blood after murdering Kazutora. Much like Izana, Mikey is an empty slate, a prodigy born to try and fill their older brother's shoes, filled with darkness from the beginning, only left with the need to find an answer on how to use it. It's ironic actually, as Izana constantly raves about stripping Mikey of his emotions and building him into a replacement brother, Mikey accomplishes the same goal unintentionally with Takemichi. Mikey takes a liking to Takemichi because he reminds him of Shinichiro. Takemichi's confidence and willingness to put himself in unwinnable situations fills a void that was left in Mikey when Shinichiro was killed. This is part of the reason why Mikey is able to push past a lot of his turning points in previous timelines, thanks to Takemichi's meddling and his guidance in critical moments of Mikey's development. Without the ability to overcome his darkness on his own, Mikey is doomed to repeat this cycle of destruction. It's why in this final arc, it's discovered that there's nothing that can be done to save Mikey. Mikey needs to admit that he needs the help and ask to be saved. It's ironic when you really put it together like that. The leader who was able to take on his partner's darkness and ignite the flame in them through a feeling of understanding, in order to be saved, needs to open himself up and become vulnerable in order to be understood, the same luxury he's been offering to all of his confidants. Something that comes so easy for Mikey to do with other people ends up being Mikey's downfall, as it is his inability to accept that understanding from others that constantly pushes him down this path of self-destruction. In order to better understand the different outcomes that can come from a leader shaping their own will and drive into their own gang, the conflict between Toman and Tenjiku easily displays the disparity between creating a morale based off of terror compared to a battle cry of partners charging into death together. At the beginning of the Kanto incident, Toman represents the underdog, and that's an understatement. A battle that sports a 350 member difference with Tenjiku on the upper side, it's no wonder Toman goes into the battle with shaking knees. Ironically enough, when the battle between Tenjiku and Toman is scheduled, Toman is able to rejoice and feel confidence from their leader Mikey, who, acknowledging that Toman is missing most of its division captains before the start of the fight, Mikey's the only frontman that they need to take on any foe. And at this point in the story, despite the odds stacked against them, Mikey's fire burns bright enough to ignite Toman tenfold. Which is why it's just so demoralizing when the small group of 50 gang members walk into the belly of the beast with no king to lead them, as Mikey is incapacitated by the death of Emma and absent during the actual gang fight. However, as a great display of love Toman feels for its leader, even in Mikey's absence, the gang is able to create a huge burst of momentum from the start of the battle, with Peiyan absolutely demolishing Shion Madarame, the 9th leader of the Black Dragons, with one punch thrown. Madarame, with absolutely no connection to his leader, fights with no purpose other than his own pride. It's obvious that facing the battle that will determine which way the pendulum swings for the entire war, someone like Madarame stood no ground against someone with everything to lose. This trend continues as, faced against the odds, even Vice Captains Angry Soya Kawada and Hakai Shiba are able to pull themselves out of their captain's shadows and display the resolve needed in Mikey's absence. Put up against the Haitani Brothers, who represent a much crueler side of the delinquent world, at the beginning of their battle, it's almost as if they stand no chance. Rindo Haitani is effective at snapping and bending bones quickly and being flexible enough to make that easy to do to his opponent, which is perfectly complemented by Ran Haitani, who uses a baton to clean up any openings Rindo may leave on himself. The Haitani brothers present a tough challenge to Hakai and Angry, who have never fought together and are used to playing the back burner for their older half. It's quite interesting, in fact, how two brothers who have spent their entire delinquent careers fighting together, even bringing entire gangs down to their whim, are immediately thrown out of line by two characters who are able to find understanding with each other in mere moments, just based off similar circumstances. Even though Hakai isn't the one that ends up completing the battle with Angry, it still speaks to the message of Toman, that through camaraderie we will achieve victory. Through understanding each other, we can grow and overcome the obstacles before us. Angry is able to dispatch both Rindo and Ran through his ability to connect with Hakai, and feel the same amount of pain he would feel as if his own brother Smiley was being killed in front of him. Being able to cry tears and conjure up the strength to destroy the ones attacking his new brother, Hakai, the fellow delinquent who was willing to put his life on the line beside him. The war between Tenjiku and Toman is a large affair with multiple battles, but nothing represents the message I'm trying to lay out here more than these two select fights out of the entire war. Three people who are able to step into the shoes of their captains for just one moment. not because they're ready for the position, but because with how much passion and loyalty they feel for their organization, they have no choice but to step up and defend it. Toman has to either summon the power to defeat Tenjiku or risk the biggest loss of all, besmirching the organization that brought them together. Putting a loss into the books of a man, Mikey, who despite his absence, Mikey's presence is still strong and clear in the hearts of every gang member that showed up to the Kanto conflict. Without Mikey's initial atmosphere that was able to foster connections like the ones that are able to conquer these impossible odds, a 50v400 battle, vice captains against the top members of the delinquent world, Toman never even would have shown its face to this battle. The major reason of this prevailing force is this: they have a reason. What both Shion Madarame and the Haitani Brothers both lacked wasn't strength itself, but the reason to use it. Amongst Tenjiku's big four, when describing the top members of his crew, the only words Izana can even invoke are the despicable deeds that each big four member has accomplished. Mochi, who beat up a police officer, Mucho, who paralyzed a kid by breaking his spine. Izana has confidence in them not because he trusts them, but because he knows they are strong. Izana does not instill faith in his comrades. Instead, he hangs their death in front of their face in order to force results out of people that could otherwise care less about the actual conflict, minus a few personal exceptions. It's on full display how paper-thin this resolve can be, when pretty much the entire Big Four is brought down by angry, fueled by the demonic rage of crying over his new injured brother. This is even further reinforced by the turncoat Mucho, who when finally forced to face his loss at the hands of Toman, and in spirit, the leader of the gang he chose to abandon in favor of Izana's era, understands that it's this family aspect of Toman that allows them to reach such heights. What possibly could Tenjiku hope to achieve with no mutual understanding or common goal? Now, what I truly feel brings all of this full circle is the character of Kakucho. When Tenjiku becomes crippled after the loss of the Big Four, it's ironic that Izana's strongest soldier, the one that turns the tides back in Tenjiku's favor, is Kakucho, the only member of Tenjiku that has devoted his life to Izana, not out of fear, but actually out of real fucking loyalty. Kakucho and Izana share a real history. They've shared heartfelt moments together and technically even coined the organization of Tenjiku together with a mutual goal. Kakucho didn't follow Izana out of fear or threat of violence. Kakucho felt true devotion to Izana and the era of delinquents that Izana sought to create. After seeing just how Toman was able to pull Tenjiku down beneath them using their loyalty and camaraderie, it's not a surprise that when faced with a monstrous power like Kakucho, unlike the other fearsome foes that Toman faced, Kakucho has a reason to fight for Izana, which is why Tenjiku was able to pull itself back up using this momentum. However, one dedicated soldier does not equate to a dedicated army. Despite Kakucho being able to severely put a dent back into Toman's forces, Takemichi's resolve against the odds allows Toman to once again challenge Izana's darkness. And it's here where the two kings come face to face, their subjects moving aside, making way for the both of them to finally find the truth behind this king's equation. When it comes time for the two kings to face off, it's finally time for the speculation to come to an end. We can analyze their philosophies of kingship through their pasts, the lives they've led. We can also try and decipher the outcomes of their leadership through the gangs that both of them have formed. But the best way to come to a conclusion between these two philosophies is to pit them against each other and have them find the answer themselves, with their feet. It speaks volumes, in my opinion, to the differences between both of the leaders here, as even when staring Izana in the face, the man who plotted to have his younger sister murdered, Mikey instead chooses to walk right past Izana in order to thank Takemichi for holding Toman down in his absence. It also must be noted here as well, Mikey's appearance at this battle further reinforces his tremendous durability and will, able to pick himself up and stand to fight Izana hours after the death of his younger sister. Funnily enough, both Mikey and Draken are reinvigorated for the battle when they learn about Takemichi's time-hopping mission, which honestly is just another point for friendship. Finally able to put their goals to the test, as the both of them begin their battle, Izana is able to take a quick lead, showing superior strength and tactics as the two exchange kicks and blows. As the two begin their conflict, Izana's wavering intentions begin to have light shed on them. Despite beginning to overwhelm Mikey and continue to stay unharmed by his nuclear strikes, Izana's mental state proves unhinged as he constantly switches up between wanting to kill Mikey and wanting to take him as his older brother. Izana even at certain points acts impressed by Mikey, proud that he's able to keep up with him in combat, claiming that this is the first time he's had fun in a long time. On the contrary, Mikey throughout this entire battle shows emotional balance, despite what must be a raging war of emotions on the inside. Even when taken off guard by Izana multiple times in the battle, he keeps his calm, and as he has shown in the past, is more interested in attempting to understand his deranged family member who is clearly lashing out in pain. Mikey fights back, of course, but continues to pry into Izana's emotions and attempt to discover his true intentions. You'd think that someone that took over most of the gangs in Tokyo and started this humongous war would have a little bit more transparent intentions. Izana does hold an advantage in the battle and begins gaining ground as his malice and murderous intent grows. Even with Mikey putting all of his might into the fight, Izana shows a clear superiority when it comes to combat prowess. Izana attempts to beat his philosophy into Mikey as he carries this momentum, fully admitting his comrades are nothing to him and only follow him out of fear, declaring his kingship as one of fact, and gangs like Toman are just playing house, living in illusions of trust and friendship. Izana shows all of his cards at this point, his darkness on full display, and the ferocity of it is represented in just how much of an advantage he keeps over Mikey. As Izana continues to thrash about, Mikey's durability begins to wane on Izana. Mikey's resolve cannot be broken, as Izana begins to grow tired of battle. It's at this point in the battle that Izana begins to break down as his emotions run rampant. Izana can't bring himself to understand that Mikey, someone who was of the same cloth, hasn't been thrown into as dark of depths as Izana has. Why? When Izana has been killed emotionally and spiritually at least millions of times, Mikey stands strong, able to weather every storm. Izana has expended all of his strength throwing a tantrum and begins losing steam, while Mikey is now able to step back up and present his case front and center. Despite how much Izana wants to believe it, he has truly never been alone. When he was young, he had Shinichiro. When he was in juvie, he had the Vicious Generation. In Tenjiku, he has Kakucho, and even now, he has Mikey, who despite everything, is open and willing to accept Izana, faults and all. As can be seen throughout this entire video, as ironic as it is, Mikey is able to extend the helping hand that he himself so desperately needs to Izana, someone who's basically the mirror image of Mikey. Both men with the capability to become kings, cut from the same cloth and put through some of the same trials. Mikey had just as much potential to become someone like Izana as Izana had to become like Mikey. In fact, in the final future of the series, Mikey ends up following in Izana's footsteps, eventually succumbing to the darkness in his own heart. Now, without getting too ahead of ourselves, it's at this point of the battle that Mikey is able to turn the tides, through his attempts at breaking through the empty shell that Izana believes to be his soul. This dichotomy is represented physically through the battle. As Izana continues to throw his kicks, they are now weakened and easily blocked and dodged by Mikey, who, in his attempts to continue to reach Izana, finally begins to land effective attacks against the former monstrous brawler. Unfortunately, despite the connection that's so clearly visible between the two brothers, Izana's damaged mental state allows him to continually reject this lifeline, pushing him further and further over the edge in complete denial that anyone could begin to understand the painful life that he has endured. Conveniently enough, the people that he continues to toss away, Kakucho, Shinichiro, Emma, even Mikey, are some of the only people that would have accepted Izana for who he was, truly no matter what. This is reflected as an unhinged Izana sees both Shinichiro and Emma standing behind Mikey, which Izana takes as them accepting Mikey's answer to the king's equation and how to handle the darkness within. Unable to accept that his answer may have been wrong all along, Izana would rather kill Mikey and bury the prevailing philosophy in the dirt. Now bringing a gun to this hand-to-hand fight, it displays just how unfair and underhanded Izana can be when denying this loss. However, as if to bring the point home once again, Kakucho is brought in to finally extend an olive branch that Izana is willing to take. The only real follower Izana has ever known and actually felt pleasure in serving him. Despite his initial denial, when shots are fired, when forced to choose between finally accepting his loss or losing another one of the people that brought him happiness, Izana finally caves. And it's here that the king's equation gets its official answer. What is a king truly a king of, if he owns an empty kingdom? How can a king create an ideal world without followers that they can trust to build it? And how can a king hope to conquer the darkness if they cannot admit they themselves have darkness in need of conquering? It's absolutely beautiful, I think, that in sacrificing himself for Kakucho and having the confidence to admit that his way of creating the new era of delinquents was wrong, Izana was actually able to inspire genuine admiration out of some of his followers. Both Izana and Mikey represent the same character, a person plagued with inner darkness, but with such great potential. The people they choose to surround themselves with greatly make the shape of the person that they will become. Born in two entirely different situations, Mikey had the benefit of being surrounded with family, while Izana rotted in the abyss of his lonesome. Any true happiness Izana had, he lived long enough to find it was all smoke and mirrors. The mother he thought had loved him wasn't his real mother, and the older brother that visited him constantly and introduced him to the idea of family already had a real younger brother, and lied to Izana his whole life. Unfortunately, at the time, Izana was unable to understand that despite not sharing a blood relation, the love he and Shinichiro shared was real. This grave mistake led Izana down a path that only led further into darkness, and instead of learning to understand others, Izana learned only to hurt others. At first, when they meet, Izana even makes Kakucho his servant, incapable of understanding what an equal friendship is and feeling more comfortable with someone as a subordinate. A subordinate is someone that you control, that can't leave you because only you can tell them when they're done. It's interesting that this is the relationship Izana chooses to form with all of his future constituents. A conditional one, where Izana holds them close through fear and threats. Perhaps it's just another way Izana's trauma reflects the way he answers the king's equation. Despite Mikey's own inner darkness, Mikey is able to shoulder the pain and suffering of those around him in order to form bonds of loyalty with his partners and friends. Holding the largest weights of all the members of Toman, only Mikey is able to understand each and every one of them. Not because he's the only one who can, but because he's the only one who's willing. Even when faced with Mucho's betrayal, Mikey deflects his resignation, exclaiming Mikey still needs Mucho in the organization despite who he sees as his true leader. It's poetic in nature that with Mikey's immense depth and ability to open up to others, inversely, this results in his greatest flaw, being unable to open up to the others around him. Like Izana, he shelters a deep abyss within his heart. Instead, he is filled with the light of the organization of friends that keep him humbled. People like Draken or Baji. But as those people start to dwindle and the number of confidants able to share Mikey's darkness wanes, it isn't just Mikey's actions that make him resemble what Izana once was. No matter how durable Mikey is, just like Izana, strength can only last for so long. The problem with the king's equation is that while the truest answer may remain the same, the person who is there to answer that question may not. As no matter how bright the world may seem at points, when you lose the people you can share that mutual understanding with, you can lose yourself.